Farming. It's the backbone of civilization, even if most folks don't think about it much. From the moment we crawled out of caves, we've been trying to grow food. And let me tell you, it's a tough business. The weather's out to get you. Bugs want to eat your crops. But farmers are resilient, always adapting, always finding new ways. Get ready for a bumpy ride through the evolution of farming. Picture this. It's 1984. Big hair, shoulder pads, and leg warmers are all the rage. And on the farm? Well, things were a bit different than the high-tech world we live in now. Farmers were still getting the job done, but they were relying on tools and techniques that had been around for decades. Tractors were the workhorses of the fields, but they weren't the computerized marvels you see today. These were sturdy machines, built to last, but they didn't have GPS guidance or fancy computer screens. Farmers relied on their own know-how, a keen eye for the land, and maybe a trusty compass to find their way.
Pesticides and fertilizers were commonplace. We hadn't yet fully grasped the environmental impact of these chemicals, and the focus was on maximizing yields. Organic farming was a niche concept, practiced by a small handful of forward-thinking folks, but it hadn't hit the mainstream yet.
But even back then, change was in the air. The mid-1980s saw the early whispers of technological advancements that would soon revolutionize the agricultural landscape. Farmers, always eager to find a better way, were quick to embrace these innovations. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of biotechnology. Scientists were starting to unlock the secrets of plant DNA, and this led to the development of genetically modified crops. These new crops promised higher yields, resistance to pests, and even the ability to thrive in harsh conditions.
Irrigation systems also saw significant improvements. Drip irrigation, a technique that delivers water directly to plant roots, became increasingly popular. This method not only conserved water, but also improved the efficiency of fertilizer application, saving farmers time and money.
Pause 7S. I bet you didn't know that George Orwell's vision has had a profound impact on modern farming. Amidst these technological advancements, it's worth pausing to reflect on an unexpected source of inspiration that has permeated the agricultural world. George Orwell. Known primarily for his dystopian novels, Orwell also possessed a profound understanding of human nature and society. In a lesser-known speech delivered in 1946, Orwell spoke about the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of hope and progress. Every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it, and wiser than the one that comes after it. But the truth is, we are all part of a continuous chain of progress. The world will change, and we must change with it. Pause 7S. Orwell's words resonated deeply with farmers who were at the forefront of embracing new technologies. His call for adaptability and progress echoed through the fields, inspiring a generation to look beyond traditional methods and embrace the future with open arms. This spirit of innovation and resilience is what drove the agricultural community to not only survive but thrive in the face of rapid technological change. As we transition into the digital dawn, Orwell's vision serves as a reminder that while technology evolves, the core values of hard work, adaptability, and hope remain constant. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the pace of technological advancement accelerated rapidly. Computers, once confined to university labs and government offices, were becoming smaller, more powerful, and more affordable. Farmers, never ones to be left behind, recognized the potential of this new technology.
Precision farming, a concept that had been little more than a pipe dream in the early 1980s, was becoming a reality. Farmers were using GPS-guided tractors to plant seeds with pinpoint accuracy, reducing waste and optimizing yields. Sensors in the fields were collecting data on soil moisture, nutrient levels, and even pest infestations, allowing farmers to make informed decisions about irrigation, fertilization, and pest control.
Now, 1984 wasn't all peace and harmony in the fields. It was a tough time to be a farmer. The weather was a fickle mistress, One minute sunshine, the next a hailstorm. One bad season could wipe out a family farm. And then there were the markets. Prices for commodities were volatile. One minute raking it in, the next struggling. But despite the challenges, there was a certain charm.
Even amidst the challenges of 1984, a revolution was brewing in laboratories far from the rolling hills and dusty fields. Scientists were starting to unravel the mysteries of DNA, the very building blocks of life. And they weren't just content with understanding it, they were learning how to manipulate it. This new frontier, known as biotechnology, held immense promise for agriculture. Imagine crops that could shrug off pests without the need for gallons of pesticides. Picture plants that could thrive in drought conditions, requiring less water and reducing the strain on precious resources. These weren't just pie-in-the-sky ideas, they were becoming a reality. The first genetically modified crops were still a few years away from hitting the market in 1984, but the groundwork was being laid. Scientists were experimenting with different genes, trying to find the combinations that would yield the desired traits. It was a time of great excitement and anticipation, as if the world of farming was standing on the cusp of a new era.
Water, the lifeblood of any farm, was also undergoing a technological transformation in the mid-1980s. For centuries, farmers had relied on rain or, in drier regions, flood irrigation to quench the thirst of their crops. But these methods were often inefficient, wasting precious water and sometimes even harming the environment. Drip irrigation, a technique that had been around for decades but was only starting to gain widespread adoption, offered a more sustainable solution. Instead of flooding entire fields, drip irrigation systems delivered water directly to the roots of plants through a network of tubes and emitters. This targeted approach minimized water waste and allowed farmers to precisely control the amount of moisture their crops received. The benefits of drip irrigation were hard to ignore. Not only did it conserve water, but it also improved crop yields, reduced weed growth, and even saved farmers money on water bills. It was a win-win situation for both the environment and the bottom line, and it quickly became one of the most significant advancements in irrigation technology.
Section 4. The Price of Progress. Challenges on the Horizon. Not everyone was entirely comfortable with the rapid pace of change sweeping through agriculture in the 1980s. Some farmers, particularly those who had been tilling the soil for generations, viewed these new technologies with suspicion. They worried about becoming overly reliant on expensive equipment and losing touch with the traditional ways of farming.
There were also concerns about the environmental impact of these advancements. Biotechnology, while promising, raised questions about the long-term effects of genetically modified crops on biodiversity and human health. The increased use of fertilizers and pesticides while boosting yields was also contributing to soil degradation and water pollution.
These challenges weren't insurmountable, but they highlighted the need for a balanced approach to agricultural innovation. It was becoming increasingly clear that simply producing more food wouldn't be enough. Farmers needed to find ways to do so sustainably, protecting the environment for future generations. Section 5. The Changing Landscape, Farm Sizes and Family Ties. The face of farming itself was changing in the 1980s. Gone were the days when small, family-run farms dotted the countryside. The economics of agriculture were shifting, and larger, more industrialized farms were becoming increasingly common.
Small farms, often unable to compete with the economies of scale enjoyed by their larger counterparts, were being squeezed out. This consolidation of farmland had a profound impact on rural communities. As small farms disappeared, so too did the jobs and the sense of community they provided. Young people were leaving rural areas in search of better opportunities in cities, leaving behind an aging population of farmers struggling to keep up with the changing times.
It was a bittersweet transition. While the rise of larger farms brought greater efficiency and productivity, it also meant the loss of a way of life that had sustained generations of farmers. The challenge for the future would be to find a balance between economic viability and the preservation of rural communities and the values they embodied. Section 1. The dawn of data computers take root.
Now, I'll be honest, back in the late 80s, computers weren't exactly my cup of tea. Give me a good tractor any day. But even I could see that these newfangled contraptions were starting to make their way onto farms, and not just for playing Oregon Trail in the farmhouse. Farmers, always up for trying something new if it meant a better harvest, began using computers for things like keeping track of their herds, managing their finances, and even analyzing soil samples. Remember those floppy disks? Yeah, we had a few of those kicking around the farm office.
It wasn't all smooth sailing, mind you. Learning how to use these early computers could be a right pain in the backside. Crashing programs, cryptic error messages, and the constant fear of deleting something important were all part of the fun. But slowly but surely, computers were changing the way we farmed, bringing a whole new level of precision and efficiency to the fields. Around the same time that computers were starting to take root, there was a growing awareness of the impact farming was having on the environment. Now, farmers have always cared about the land. It's in their blood. But the sheer scale of modern agriculture meant that even small changes could have big consequences.
People started talking about things like soil erosion, water pollution, and the loss of biodiversity. Organic farming, once seen as a fringe movement, was gaining mainstream appeal. Farmers began experimenting with cover crops, crop rotation, and other techniques to improve soil health and reduce their reliance on chemical inputs.
It wasn't always easy being green. Organic farming often meant lower yields and higher costs, at least in the beginning. But more and more farmers were realizing that taking care of the environment wasn't just good for the planet, it was good for business in the long run. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the arrival of something that would spark debates that rage on even today genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. These weren't your granddad's seeds. Scientists had figured out how to tinker with the very DNA of plants, giving them superpowers like resistance to pests and tolerance to herbicides.
The first GMO crops hit the market in the early 90s, promising higher yields and fewer headaches for farmers. And they delivered, at least in the short term. Farmers who adopted these new seeds saw their profits soar. Fields that used to require multiple pesticide applications were now practically pest-free.
But not everyone was thrilled about this new technology. Some folks worried about the long-term health effects of consuming genetically modified food. Others fretted about the impact on biodiversity and the risk of creating superweeds resistant to herbicides. The debate over GMOs was just heating up, and it would continue to divide consumers and policymakers for years to come. Farming was no longer a local affair. The global marketplace was expanding, and farmers in the heartland were suddenly competing with producers from all over the world. Trade agreements like NAFTA, which came into effect in 1994, opened up new markets but also brought new challenges.
Consumers were becoming more discerning about where their food came from and how it was produced. Terms like organic, fair trade, and locally sourced were no longer just marketing buzzwords, they were becoming buying decisions. Farmers had to adapt, finding ways to differentiate their products and connect with consumers who were increasingly interested in the story behind their food.
This era also saw the rise of supermarkets and the decline of small independent grocers. Farmers, once accustomed to selling their produce directly to local shops, now found themselves dealing with large corporations with complex supply chains and strict quality standards. The balance of power was shifting, and not always in favor of the farmer. Section 5. A new breed of farmer education and entrepreneurship. The stereotypical image of a farmer, clad in overalls and a straw hat, was starting to change. The new generation of farmers was more likely to be found wearing a baseball cap and carrying a smartphone than a pitchfork. They were tech-savvy, business-minded, and passionate about sustainability.
Agricultural colleges were seeing a surge in enrollment as young people flocked to study agronomy, environmental science, and agricultural economics.
This new breed of farmer was also entrepreneurial. They were embracing technology, using social media to connect with customers and e-commerce platforms to sell their products. Section 1. Data starts to drive decisions. Precision farming takes off. Now remember those computers that were starting to appear in farm offices in the late 80s? Well, by the mid-90s, they were moving out of the house and into the fields, and things were about to get really interesting.
GPS technology, once the exclusive domain of fighter pilots and sailors, was becoming more affordable and accessible. Farmers started using it to map their fields with incredible accuracy, identifying everything from soil variations to pest infestations. This was the dawn of precision farming, and it was a game changer.
Instead of treating entire fields with the same amount of fertilizer or pesticide, farmers could now target specific areas based on real-time data. This meant less waste, lower costs, and a lighter environmental footprint. It was like having X-ray vision for your fields, allowing you to see what was happening beneath the surface and make decisions accordingly. Section 2. Supermarkets demand perfection, the rise of food standards.
A blemish here, a bruise there, and your entire crop could be rejected. This obsession with cosmetic perfection led to a lot of food waste. Perfectly edible fruits and vegetables were being left to rot in fields simply because they didn't meet the arbitrary standards set by supermarkets.
The late 1990s saw a series of food scares that shook public confidence in the agricultural industry.
Mad cow disease, a fatal brain disorder in cattle, emerged in the UK and spread to other parts of Europe, raising concerns about the safety of beef.
Genetically modified foods, already a topic of debate, faced a growing backlash. Critics dubbed them frankenfoods, fueling fears about their potential impact on human health and the environment. Just as computers had revolutionized farm management in the late 1980s, the internet was about to transform the way farmers connected with the world in the late 1990s.
Dial-up modems, with their agonizingly slow speeds and distinctive screeching sounds, were the gateway to this new frontier.
But soon, farmers were using email to communicate with suppliers, buyers, and even other farmers across the country and around the world. The internet was breaking down geographical barriers and creating a sense of community among farmers who might otherwise never have crossed paths. Amidst the rise of industrial agriculture, the globalization of food systems, and the growing public distrust of large-scale farming practices, a quiet revolution was brewing.
Consumers, increasingly concerned about where their food came from and how it was produced, were seeking out alternatives to the supermarket experience.
Shoppers flocked to these open-air markets, eager to buy fresh, locally grown produce directly from the people who had nurtured it from seed to harvest.
This renewed interest in local food systems went beyond farmers' markets.
Right, 1999 going into 2000. Now most folks remember this for the whole Y2K bug scare. Would computers melt down when the clock struck midnight? Would planes fall out of the sky? Well, as we all know, the world didn't end. But Y2K did mark a turning point for technology, especially in farming. See, the fear of a digital meltdown forced everyone to upgrade their systems.
Now, with all this new technology came a tidal wave of data. Sensors in the fields were collecting information on everything from soil moisture to crop yields.
That's where farm management software came in. These programs, initially a bit clunky and complicated, allowed farmers to gather all that data in one place, analyze it, and use it to make more informed decisions. The age of data-driven agriculture had arrived, and farmers were embracing it with cautious optimism.
Remember those food scares in the late 90s? Well, they had a lasting impact on the way we think about food. Consumers more than ever wanted to know where their food came from, how it was produced, and who was growing it.
Technology played a key role in this shift. Barcodes and QR codes started appearing on food packaging, allowing consumers to trace products back to their source with a quick scan of their smartphones.
Section 4. The Green Revolution 2.0, sustainability goes mainstream.
But in the early 2000s, the term sustainability started appearing everywhere. And it wasn't just hippies talking about it anymore.
Organic farming, once a niche market, was going mainstream. Supermarkets dedicated entire aisles to organic produce, and consumers were willing to pay a premium for it. Section 5. Feeding a crowded planet. The challenge of food security looms large.
With more mouths to feed and finite resources, the pressure was on to produce more food, more efficiently, and with less environmental impact.
Precision farming techniques were refined, allowing farmers to squeeze every last drop of yield from their fields. Biotechnology continued to advance, with new GMO crops promising higher yields, drought tolerance, and improved nutritional content. Section 1. The rise of the machines. Automation takes root.
Well, in the 2000s, it started to feel like science fiction was becoming science fact, at least on the farm.
Driverless tractors, guided by GPS and sensors, could plow, plant, and harvest crops with incredible precision, all without a farmer lifting a finger. Well, almost.
Robotic milking parlors became commonplace on dairy farms, automatically milking cows, monitoring their health, and even dispensing customized feed.
Data gets smarter. AI and machine learning enter the fields.
Well, in the 2010s, things got really interesting when artificial intelligence, or AI, and machine learning entered the scene.
Farmers started using AI-powered systems to analyze everything from weather patterns to soil conditions to crop health. These systems could predict yields with astonishing accuracy, identify disease outbreaks before they spread, and even optimize irrigation and fertilizer application down to the individual plant. Back to the future: vertical farming and urban agriculture.
Vertical farming, a concept that had been around for a while, suddenly seemed less like a gimmick and more like a necessity.
And it wasn't just skyscrapers. Rooftop gardens, community plots, and even abandoned buildings were being transformed into urban farms, bringing fresh food to food deserts and reconnecting city dwellers with the source of their sustenance. The consumer is king. Personalization and direct-to-consumer models.
Farmers, ever adaptable, responded by getting even more creative with their business models.
Direct-to-consumer platforms like online farmers markets and subscription boxes exploded in popularity. Farmers were connecting with consumers directly, building relationships, and even offering personalized products based on individual preferences. So here we are, 2024. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? From tractors to touchscreens, from floppy disks to AI, farming has come a long way in the past 40 years.
Climate change is the elephant in the room, literally and figuratively. Extreme weather events, from droughts to floods, are becoming more frequent and severe, threatening crop yields and livelihoods. Water scarcity is a growing concern, especially in arid regions.
Right then, we've covered a lot of ground here, haven't we? From the analog age of 1984 to the digital frontier of today, farming has gone through a technological revolution that would make your head spin faster than a combine harvester in a wheat field.
Remember those days of hand-drawn maps and relying on gut instinct? Now we've got GPS-guided tractors that practically drive themselves, sensors that can tell you what a plant had for breakfast, and computers crunching numbers faster than you can say crop yield.
But here's the thing, while the tools have changed, the fundamental principles of farming haven't. We're still at the mercy of the weather, we're still fighting pests, and we're still trying to coax the best possible harvest from the land. Section 2, the double-edged sword of progress, balancing yields with values.
Now, I'm not one to shy away from progress. Those fancy new gadgets and gizmos have made life on the farm a whole lot easier in many ways. We can produce more food than ever before, feed more people, and do it with greater efficiency. But there's always a flip side, isn't there?
Bridging the gap between farmers and folks.
The growing connection between farmers and consumers is encouraging. There was a real disconnect, but those days are fading.
Farmers markets are booming. Social media connects farmers and consumers. Those anonymous hands now have names and faces.
People care. They want ethical and sustainable food. They're eager to support farmers doing things right.
A hopeful harvest. Reasons to be cheerful about the future of food.
Farming is tough, and the challenges are real, but the future of food is bright, and here's why.
We've got the technology, tools that help us farm smarter and more efficiently, and we've got the people. The next generation is innovative and passionate about sustainability. Finally, consumers are demanding transparency and supporting sustainable practices. Section 5, The Call of the Land, Why Farming Will Always Matter.
So there you have it. The story of farming from 1984 to 2024 and beyond is a story of change, adaptation, and resilience. It's a story that's still being written, and the ending is far from certain. But one thing's for sure, farming will always matter.
It's the foundation of civilization, the source of our sustenance, and the connection to the natural world that sustains us. As long as there are people on this planet, there will be farmers working tirelessly to feed them. And that, my friends, is something worth celebrating.
So next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to appreciate the hard work, dedication, and sheer bloody-mindedness of the farmers who made it possible. They're the unsung heroes of our time, and their work is essential to our survival. Here's to the farmers, past, present, and future. Cheers